Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar where we're looking at developments with carbon capture and storage in the US. My name's Carl Jeffrey. I'm the publisher of Carbon Capture Journal in London, and today we should be hearing from three companies in the center of the US CCS industry. So that's Geostock Sandia, Volt 4401, and should be Tenaska. So first we're going to hear from Sylvain Riba, President and CEO of Geostock Sandia. They're a engineering and geoscience company specializing in subsurface injection and disposal of CO2 and wastewater. And they've prepared over 26 Class VI CO2 sequestration permits. Sylvain is joining us from Houston, so he's going to explain how he sees the CCS market evolving in the States and discuss their work on Class 6 wells in the Midwest. And second, we can hear from Scott Rennie, who's President and CEO of Volt 4401. He's going to give Volt's perspective on progress and challenges in the US CCS development. Scott is joining us from Sacramento in California. And finally, we should be hearing from Bret Estep of Tenaska, who's responsible for development, commercialization, and implementation of Tenaska's efforts in CCS and gas-fired generation markets. They have 11 CCS hubs in development in 9 US states. So there's Bret joining us now. So each speaker is going to have 10 to 15 minutes, and then there should be time for questions at the end. You can put your questions in the Q&A box at any time. And we're only going to accept questions directly relevant to the topic of the webinar, which is understanding the current situation with CCS in the US from an industry perspective. So I hope you won't mind me dismissing any questions which aren't directly related to that. So hello, Bret. Nice to see you. And so we're going to start with Sylvain Riba. So Sylvain, Scott and Bret, if you want to switch your cameras off now. But Sylvain, would you like to share your perspective on what's happening in the US CCS projects and how you see the market evolving?
Yes, happy to do that, Carl. Thank you very much for joining us today. I appreciate the opportunity and looking forward to the questions at the end of the conversation. So, as Carl mentioned, we really focus on the S part of the CCS world, right? We really tailor our services to the sequestration piece. So, we really see two types of customers and project sizes in the US. Very large projects, very large hubs that can store 2 to 5 million tons per year of CO2. And they typically target third-party producers, third-party CO2 producers. They are usually, those projects are led by very large market caps that are capable of financing those projects in their balance sheet. And then we also deal with a lot of smaller producers, single emitters that want to, they operate one facility generating CO2, producing CO2, and they want to find a solution to reduce their carbon emission from that single site. Ethanol producers are one example. I'll come back to it in a minute. But also natural gas power plants, cement facilities are also doing that. Today, the market in the US, the CCS market is, I would say, in the permitting phase. It takes about 2 years for the EPA to grant and approve a permit to drill and inject CO2. And we are in the middle of that process now. And the industry is waiting for the next phase, which will be, once the permits are approved, a lot of injection, a lot of drilling, and a lot of CO2 put in the ground. The investors focus primarily on 45Q, which are tax credits that are available in the US. When you inject 1 ton of CO2 underground, you get a tax credit, so you reduce your taxes. But they also target voluntary carbon markets or want to improve the margins of the product they are selling. And ethanol is an example of that. So I want to spend a minute on this aspect of the CCS market. So ethanol is produced from several streams. One of them is corn. And you produce ethanol via fermentation. You take the sugar and you generate ethanol. In the process, you generate CO2. The beauty of that CO2 from ethanol is it's a clean stream. It only requires dehydration and compression to inject CO2 underground. So it's relatively inexpensive compared to other CO2 sources that may require filtration to clean the CO2. post-combustion of natural gas, for example, is an example of something a little bit more expensive to do. So CO2 producers, ethanol producers have a must are cost competitive in the market, and it's a good feedstock to inject. Moreover, as an ethanol producer, if you can reduce the carbon intensity or CI of your ethanol, you can target different markets. SAF, sustainable aviation fuel, is one example. So the idea of carbon capture and sequestration for customers is not just a tax incentive. It's also improving, enhancing the margins, the quality of the product they are selling. You sell SAF as a premium, for example. The other aspect, which is interesting, is you can inject locally. So you don't always have to create a hub, as mentioned before. You can do a single solution tailored to your needs, to your single ethanol plant, and generate the required carbon intensity reduction. So if you look at that, and it's something which I think is quite key in the process here, is a lot of the players are not just looking at CCS per se, within the boundaries of what a CCS project can offer, but it also allows them to improve their own business. An ethanol producer is in the business of selling ethanol. CCS is a way to improve their margin. So that's an interesting angle that I see in a lot of our customers. It's not a required step, but it's an important one in their economic calculations. And why are ethanol producers involved in it more easily than some other opportunities, for example? Because they already own the land. And injecting CO2 underground requires accessing a pore space, and they own that thanks to their corn production already. They already understand how to trade commodities. They trade sugar, they trade ethanol, so they add an additional stream of revenue with CO2. They also manage the logistics of transporting, streams of effluents. So they know all the aspects of it. On Geostock, as mentioned at the beginning, Geostock Sandia is primarily focused on the S part. So we would provide permitting, geoscience studies, and then we act as a general contractor. So I found this conversation today quite fascinating because I'm really interested in hearing Scott and Bret talking about the other aspects of the CCS industry. So we design wells for, that go deep, 6,000 to 10,000 feet. Those are ultra deep injection to make sure the CO2 stays there. We also monitor the injection once it's been done throughout the life of the project and perform operations and maintenance for customers. And to give you an idea, we have drilled over the past 3-4 years around 8 wells, injectors as well as stratigraphic test wells that are required ahead of the injection. Lastly, I want to cover some technical and commercial questions. In terms of technical, permitting is key. You must demonstrate, and we do that for our customers, you must demonstrate that the well and the injection is safe, that the CO2 will stay downhole, and that the number one burden of proof is that there will not be a single contamination of the underground water, drinking water table, which is anywhere between 0 and 1,000 feet deep. We are injecting much, much deeper. So one element of the conversation is to make sure that you have a buffer zone in between your injection and the drinking water zone. You also make sure that the CO2 plume extension is monitored, and that you anticipate and model the extension of the CO2 plume. It's a requirement as well. And you also make sure that you do not generate any seismicity induced. This is part of the exercise to limit the flow rate below potential seismic events. And this is a concept that has been proven since the 70s. It's something that is not always known, but the EPA created the UIC, underground injection control philosophy in the 70s, starting with wastewater, with Class I wells, which has been a system and a design which has been working very well since the 70s. And they, of course, expanded it to a lot of different streams from calling those wells class 1, class 2, class 6 wells for CO2. But it's the same concept behind this. You must demonstrate technically that your design is sound and you again protect the drinking water as well as neighbors without seismic events. In terms of commercial concerns, again, I see the impact of diversifying your revenue stream as one main driver for customers. Again, it's not just about reducing the CO2, it's also generating more revenue. So being able to diversify your market is a big driver for investors. Um, it's not just for ethanol. You can also think about as a natural gas producer in the US, if you are targeting Europe, Europe is implementing very stringent methane intensity limits by 2030. So as a natural gas producer, if you're considering exporting natural gas to Europe, you have to reduce your methane intensity ahead of time. And those type of products and projects can help you do that. So it's a huge value add for any business. Voila, I will stop there. And I'll be looking forward to questions at the end of the session.
Oh,
Thank
very
you,
good. We've
Carl.
got a you haven't used your 15 minutes up yet, but there's a question from Rick Schreinermakers, our old friend. He's a CEO of Low Carbon Services in Texas, asking what tools are you recommending for CO2 monitoring during the life of the sequestration projects?
Yeah, so several solutions can be implemented. You always have to be cost conscious. So you can't really implement a 20 to 30 years monitoring process that is too costly. So typically you rely on small seismic monitoring devices. It's not a real 3D seismic requiring to bring trucks and monitoring them, but you do kind of a passive system where you monitor events, and if you have one, you tie that back to your modeling. Modeling takes a big part into the monitoring life of a project. You're trying to assess the differences between your predictions and reality. So you monitor also with wells. It's part of the requirement. You must have monitoring wells around your injection site, and you have sensors in the wells that monitor, temperature or various amount of measurements, I would say. And it is effective again in terms of making it an economic case. There are solutions out there that allow you from microseismicity to monitoring to modeling that allows you to monitor effectively CO2 plume extension.
Well, very good. So we've now got a question from England. So David Hughes is a reservoir engineer specializing in carbon capture. I don't follow this exactly, but so that 45Q credits not repayable for leakage that are caused after 5 years of storage. So if it doesn't stay in after 5 years, do people have a penalty then, or do you just monitor for 5 years? Or
So I would defer, any question regarding tax credit to an expert. I'm not an expert in tax incentives, so I will be very prudent in my answer. You always need to talk to an expert in that field. But bear in mind that the burden of proof on any developer is to demonstrate that your system will not leak. So and it's been a proven system. It's been very effective for many years. The oil and gas industry has been injecting a tremendous amount of CO2 for enhanced oil recovery, not specifically for CO2 injection, but it's the same concept, it's the same system, and it proves to be effective. You just have to do it the right way. But for David's question, please, ask a specific attorney on tax credit. I don't want to say the wrong thing.
well, okay. Perhaps we've got time for so Hannah Schlurth. I've looked you up on LinkedIn. I think you're air pollution specialist with California Air Resources Board. Are most of the companies seeking Class 6 permits planning to store CO2 from multiple sources? Or are these co-located with the CO2 capture site? I think you've said there's both. I don't know.
Yeah,
You
the
want-
answer is both. Of course, if you can bring a third party CO2 into your own injection site, you generate much more revenue, much more income, which is always good. But it does not have to be. You can simply find an in situ solution for your own needs as a CO2 producer. And you're just talking about, instead of the 2 to 5 million tons I was mentioning, maybe you're targeting 100 to 200,000 tons a year, which is enough to make it economic. But the answer is, both.
Well, we've just got 2 minutes left. These two questions about the same. Both Robina Shaheen, CO2 sensors around the well, and Nigel Greatorex about tracking leakage. I don't know if that means around the well or on the surface.
Yeah.
Um,
So, so the answer is yes, but typically you want to predict. You don't want to monitor CO2 only. You usually employ, again, a cheaper version of a seismic, monitoring device to make sure that you anticipate any problem. But again, I want to reemphasize that, which I think is an important step of the equation. The designs are made so that no leakage happens. And, the history proves us right. There has not been a single leak of wastewater since 1974, for example. So it's a system which has been working for the past 50 years, and which proved to work. Okay.
Oh, that's good. Very good. Well, thank you very much. So we'll go
Thank
to
you.
California now. So we're going to hear from Scott Rennie, who's the CEO of Vault 4401, who's going to give Vault's perspective on the progress and challenges in the US CCS development. So I'll pass over to Scott. Cheers.
All right. Well, appreciate the opportunity here. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where folks are at. So I'll start by giving a little bit of a flavor of who Vault is, and then I'll talk about how we're seeing the market develop, and what we probably expect to see going forward. And if it works here, I will share a couple visuals as we go. So who is Vault? Our we're a developer of CCS projects. So much like Sylvain, we focus on sequestration. We work directly with partners to develop CCS projects. So we'll bring our own capital. We will work with our partners to develop projects sort of in tandem with them. We started our company with the view of being very good at sequestration, putting carbon dioxide underground. Most of the industries that we will end up working with, whether that's ethanol or cement or power or whatever, most of those companies aren't going to have a lot of subsurface experience. So really our value proposition is to work with our partners, and especially to work on putting carbon dioxide underground. So, we really built our team around that. We have a sort of core group of kind of eight or 10 folks within our team with about a decade of CCS experience. And then we've built around that team, with, the skill sets we need. So we do our technical work in-house. We've written and submitted 7 Class VI permits, for our projects. We do our land acquisition in-house, and we do our execution in-house. Um, we, we took a view, that CCS projects are hard. I personally worked on CCS projects for half a dozen years before we started Vault. And so given that CCS projects are hard, we said, let's start with the simplest projects we can. And Sylvain did a really good job of teeing me up here, talking about the high purity of carbon dioxide from ethanol plants. Um, if you can take a high purity stream of CO2 that sits near good geology, so you don't need to have long pipelines, that's going to be the simplest and most cost-effective CCS project. So you have opportunities that exist in that space, with ethanol plants, with natural gas processing, which Sylvain also addressed, and also with ammonia plants. So these are our high purity streams of CO2. That's where we chose to start, is looking at single source, single sink projects with high purity streams of CO2. So this is where I'm going to try to share a visual. Just give me one moment. All right, Carl, can you confirm that's
Yeah,
working?
yeah, that's good. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right, so this is just to give folks a little bit of a map of where Vault is operating. So we've got 8 projects under development across 4 states, generally in the U.S. Midwest. So Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, Illinois are the places where we're operating. So between those 8 projects, it's about 2.7 million tons a year under contract. And you see a couple of lighter uh, hexagons on here that represent future projects for us. So all of these right now are ethanol plants, and you'll maybe understand our perspective on why as I talk about the market. We, ethanol is a nice place to start. We would also like to work in other industries. If you can think of an industry where CCS could apply. We've probably looked at it, and we're optimistic on certain projects. They take longer and are generally a bit harder to develop. And so this is really sort of our view is let's start with ethanol as a gateway into developing a broader suite of a portfolio of CCS projects. Um, okay, that's enough on Vault. Just to wanted to set that up for folks. I'm going to talk about a few things in terms of what we're seeing and maybe be able to add a bit of color around a couple of the questions that were asked earlier. So this, I'm going to show 2 pages here. This first one is what do we see today in the United States in terms of CCS development? So top of the list, we are a policy-driven business. What's the developments in policy? So we did see some change there last year. The One Big Beautiful Bill Act passed by the US Congress did a few things. In large part, it preserved CCS economics as they were prior. So that was a good news story. A lot of clean energy credits got pulled back. Maintaining the policy support was positive. And so what we have is a continuation of 45Q, generally as it was since 2022 at $85 a ton. So what that does is it preserves economics, positive economics for what I'll characterize as pre-combustion projects, the high purity projects I was talking about. If you have the right combination of scale and proximity, those projects pencil out at 45Q at $85. Post-combustion projects generally are not in the money at $85. So you've got a nice baseline there, but you're looking for some kind of economic uplift to make the projects go around. And one thing I will say is, we've been doing this for 5 years. I'd say it's a pretty consistent theme that no investor wants to go and lose money doing a CCS project. And so you always got to look for what is the true economic benefit overall of a project, and it's got to go around. Couple of additional things that happened in the last year here. So we did have a new administration come in last year. The Department of Energy made some changes in their priorities. And so there was about $4 billion of DOE funding that got pulled back, canceled, otherwise went away. And that's impacted a number of projects, including a couple of early stage cement projects that we were working on. So some of those projects, unfortunately, have either slowed down or stopped. The other big change we've seen in the last year is there was quite a bit of energy around blue hydrogen driven by 45V credits that were included in the 2022 Inflation Reduction Act. The change in 2025 was to pull the qualification date for those projects from 2032 back to end of 2027. And so really any project that's going to qualify for those credits needs to be under construction by the end of 2027. Our view is there's probably a few projects that may hit that milestone, but really I think the near-term universe of blue hydrogen projects will be smaller than what we might have expected a year ago. So I think that's sort of what we see in the market driven by policy. And then we go to permitting. So Sylvain addressed this a little bit. You know, for most of the states in the United States, we have to go to the federal EPA to get our permit, which is a Class 6 permit. The timeline for approval has been very long, and there's been a lot more permits submitted than there have been permits approved. Uh, I listened in on a Senate EPW hearing about a year ago, and one of the senators uh, was complaining about the long backlog. At that time, there were 169 outstanding Class 6 permits in the U.S. Uh, I looked at their backlog yesterday. It's 207. So in the last year, the backlog of EPA permits has actually grown, has not gotten smaller. And so what we're seeing sort of on the ground is, EPA has expressed a view that they would like to approve permits in 2 years. We're probably seeing more like a 3-year approval cycle. I think there are some competent folks at EPA who are trying to make the system better and working to relieve the backlog, but it's going to take time for permit cycles to come down. One of the things they're trying to do is, and this is just being implemented starting, this year, is a pilot program where EPA is going to be working through a new process on these approvals with a very select number of permits to try and pull that cycle time down to somewhere in the 12 to 18-month timeframe. And so what we'll see through 2026 is a few permits will run through that process. EPA will be testing it out. And the hope would be that they're able to roll that out more broadly over the next couple of years to really bring down the cycle times to something that is a little more palatable for investors. The other thing that's a dynamic here is we are starting to see more states get primacy. So the real big one late last year was Texas got primacy. There's a little over 20 CCS projects proposed in Texas. So now the Texas Railroad Commission has primacy over those. And over time, that will hopefully help projects in Texas move forward. Last year, West Virginia also got primacy. Arizona also got primacy. And so I think over the next few years, we'll start to see more and more states take on their own regulatory process around CCS permitting. And that should be positive for the market. Third big bullet point here, and I cannot stress this enough, is public acceptance. I say to our team a lot that, we have a lot of challenges in our business. Our biggest challenges are people challenges, whether that's, federal government, state government, local government, landowners. And so, for each of our projects, we need to go ahead and get a certain number of land rights from human beings who own the land. There's an education process. There's a leasing process with those folks. We also need to get local government support and state government support. And I'll say, having been doing this for 5 years now, there's an element still of building the airplane as we're flying it. I'll use an example of Indiana, where they passed enabling CCS legislation in 2022, which put them fairly early among Midwest states. As we go into early 2026 here, they're still buttoning up elements of that process at the state level. At the county level, we're still working with counties to sort of work with them to establish their own rules around how they're going to allow CCS projects to happen in the counties. And so this is very much a huge part of enabling CCS projects to happen is getting, state support, local support, landowner support to make things happen. Last thing I'll say, I guess second to last thing here is there are some unique financial aspects to CCS projects. So Sylvain addressed this a little bit around the financial benefit of doing a CCS project is really a tax credit. So if you're a Fortune 500 company, that's great. You can offset your tax burden. If you're a smaller company and you don't have the tax, tax burden to offset, you've got to go ahead and turn those tax credits into money. And so that's done either through a tax equity process, partnership structure, or a transfer of those tax credits to another market participant. The good news on that is we've seen a number of transactions now that prove that that can be done. So the process of turning 45Q tax credits into cash is possible. It's a bit of a process, but it can be done. The other thing, and this comes back to the question on what about pullback of 45Q credits if there's a leak? So 45Q has a 3-year look back period, meaning that if you lose any carbon dioxide, there's a 3-year box around that in which tax credits can be recaptured. Some very large market participants may choose to balance sheet that risk. Most folks are going to choose to insure the risk. And you can do that by putting in place a recapture insurance policy. I will say those policies are really expensive at the moment, but they are placeable. So folks like us that are multi-billion-dollar companies and are going to be exposed to the risk of leakage and the risk of having tax credits recaptured, we can place insurance to sort of manage that risk. And I guess last point I'll make on this page, this is really hard. And I think, anyone on the call here who's involved in developing CCS probably is living that. A number of folks on my team, including myself, have worked in oil and gas for a long period of time. And one of our running jokes is that if we want to go do something easy, we'll start an oil and gas company. The economics can be challenging. Working with our counterparties to establish trust, to establish common understanding in places where, an ethanol company or cement company doesn't understand reservoir engineering takes time, takes effort. Getting our social license to operate is really important, can be difficult, and then spoke to the permitting challenges at effectively 3 levels of government. So that's what we see in the market today. I'm running a couple minutes over, so I will be brief here, but I'll give you a little bit of a view of what we see going forward. And I think this webinar is free, so I will say that this outlook is worth what you paid for it. What we think will happen in the next few years is a good number of these pre-combustion projects around ethanol, natural gas processing, ammonia will proceed to COD between now and 2029. We've seen a few projects happen. Tallgrass's Trailblazer project came on stream late last year. That's a pretty significant project, and my hat's really off to those guys. They've done a great job. That's going to tie in 12 or 13 ethanol plants into a pipeline system. We'll see a couple of CODs from Carbon TerraVault and BKV early this year on natural gas processing projects. That's great. And then I think we're going to see some additional permit approvals through the course of 2026 that enables CODs in 26 and 27. So we're going to start to see more projects actually built, actually on stream, actually injecting CO2 and building the industry's track record. I spoke to hydrogen, so I'll just go to post-combustion projects. So I think Bret's probably going to have some really good perspective on this. We see really 2 areas. So I said, on 45Q alone, post-combustion projects are economically challenged. So where can you get the additional economic uplift to make, whether it's a project on a power plant, on a cement plant, on some kind of plant where you've got a post-combustion flue gas stream, where can you get the economic uplift to make that project work? So we really see 2 areas at the moment where that looks possible. So one is around power, where we think natural gas processing or natural gas combined cycle with CCS, where you're tied into likely some kind of data center customer that looks like a $1 trillion company, and is willing to pay for the power. Um, we're seeing some energy around that market, and I'll leave Brett to expand on that a bit. The other place that we have optimism is where you've got a carbon dioxide removal opportunity, where you're saying, okay, I'm not just abating carbon dioxide, I'm actually removing it from the atmospheric system. And some market participants are willing to pay, call it a couple $100 a ton for carbon dioxide removals, and that can really help bring certain projects into the money. So, I guess last thing I'll say really is, we are a policy-driven business. Policy changes. We have a situation right now where we're going to see expansion of actual operating projects over the next 3 to 4 years. That's going to build a track record. It's going to, companies like the folks you're seeing on screen here today are going to be building that track record. And then, we'll have an administration change in 2029, and that policy direction that we see post that will really drive the trajectory post 2029. So, Carl, apologies for taking longer than my time, but hopefully that was helpful to folks.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, there's a question. Maybe I don't know if you want to take it with typing from PK Panda from Energy Fuse Group. He's asking about blue ammonia project. I know you mentioned blue hydrogen. We'll go now to
Yeah.
Bret Estep. I think you're in Birmingham, Alabama, Brett. Is it a?
I'm normally
That's
in
it.
Birmingham, but I'm in Omaha, Nebraska today at our headquarters.
Oh, okay. So you're responsible for development, commercialization, and implementation of Tenaska's efforts, and you've got 11 CCS hubs in 9 US states. So you're going to take questions, but we're going to talk about yeah. Would you like to give an overview of what Tenaska is doing with carbon capture?
Yeah, for sure. Maybe I'll take a moment and just talk about Tenaska generally, and then what our view of CCS projects are specifically. So Tenaska, independent power producer based here in Omaha, Nebraska, been in business about 40 years, started as a combined cycle power plant developer. Now we are organized around four main business lines. Tenaska Marketing Ventures, which is North America's largest physical gas trader. So we move anywhere from 10 to 15% of physical natural gas we touch in some form or fashion on a daily basis. So a major player in gas trading, also a major player in power trading. So Tenaska Power Services, TPS, largest third-party energy manager in the US by probably a factor of two. So that's wholesale physical power assets, and about 15 gigs of load, mostly large industrial and commercial. And then we own and operate a fleet of power gen, around 8 gigawatts, mostly gas fired, but a little wind and solar. And then we have a development arm. And I'm in the development arm, and that development arm of Tenaska, wind, solar, batteries, natural gas, and then CCS projects. So that's sort of the general overview of the company, about a $4 billion balance sheet, 800 or so folks. Now, CCS for us specifically, that's one of those five development verticals. We made a decision 3 or 4 years ago, looking around the corner, that CCS was going to be a long dated development asset that was going to span administrations. Scott certainly talked about it. Things move in and out. These projects take a long time to do. The projects almost move in a geologic scale, which is not for the faint of heart or the thinly capitalized, but they are very, very good, very site constrained, geology constrained, limited resources that we feel like have decades long value in the energy industry and beyond. So our strategy around CCS is a hub and spoke model, as opposed to, let's say, a linear infrastructure model or a single source, single sink model. So we went multi-tenant hub. We have 11 of those now. 10. We sold one last year. I don't think that's out for public consumption yet on the actual details, but we now have 10 of these hub projects. 5 of those are in what we call phase one. So 4 of those 5 have their Class 6s submitted and are working their way through the process. The 5th will have submitted later this year. And like I said, those are multi-tenant hubs, base design, 5 million metric tons per project, 5 million metric tons per year per project. And then we view our customer framework in really four quadrants, sort of the easiest or the front end phase. And what was prior, our focus was existing industry. So everything that Sylvain and Scott talked about. So that would be ethanol, where it crosses over our projects, which is not very many, cement, steel, gas processing, petrochem, et cetera. So all of that existing industry segment within a radius of our projects, that's sort of the existing customer market. And, with all of the gymnastics of last year, that momentum took a hit, but I do think those are durable long-term offers that will happen. On the new project side, blue molecules, again, we see some of that developing over time, direct air capture, and then finally, power gen. And so Scott and I've had a number of conversations about this, but that is a focus of ours now, combined cycle with capture. So Tenaska has prior experience in that world. Sorry, guys. Phone's ringing off the hook here. So we have prior experience in that effort, building combined cycles with capture, pursuing those kinds of projects. And I think the way we will pursue that going forward is that Tenaska's basic approach here is building on our own skill set. And that is a long-term combined cycle developer. And what we saw over the last couple of years is exactly what Scott teed up, is this movement from the hyperscalers to say, despite maybe current priorities in the administration, that a low or no carbon solution to large dispatchable power gen is still a priority for a subset. And that subset is the biggest, most proactive, well-capitalized segment of the power of the hyperscaler world. They still want low CI power. What that puts you in is really a group of 3 or 4 projects. Small modular reactors, which we are a fan of, but we think that's a very long-dated development play. That's probably mid-2030s to 2040s at any really substantial scale. You have to start now to even get there, so we fully support that effort, but it's going to be a bit. The second is enhanced geothermal. Again, less site constrained than traditional geothermal, but still probably a smaller bite-sized. And then ultra-firmed renewables, so lots of batteries, lots of long-duration storage around wind and solar. Again, support that, but somewhat geographic constrained. And then the fourth option out of that is really combined cycle with capture. And yes, the $85 won't get you there, but really you've got to think about what's the implied price of carbon, or what's the value premium or the green premium that you put on top of that. And we're seeing prices that are supported in that effort. It is certainly north of $85. You're not going to build a project on a tax incentive alone. And I think from an energy policy standpoint, we shouldn't be building projects on tax incentives anyway. There needs to be a market driver for that. We are seeing that with a subset of customers, and that across those 5 priority projects that we have. Those are hub projects with integrated combined cycle with capture. That is absolutely our focus, and that's where we're seeing a ton of customer interest, and we expect multiple announcements this year to go along with that.
Wow. So it's very interesting. You're all hubs, whereas because Sylvain was talking about this idea of a one standalone plant that could work financially viably. I guess the advantage of a standalone plant is you don't need any pipelines, which is quite differently with public perceptions, isn't it? But
Yeah, it does solve the transportation problem, but I would say when we effectively have now taken our hubs, and by adding our own combined cycle with capture on top of them, we create our own emissions. We solve the pipeline problem in that we are very deliberate in siting our power plants as close to our injection wells as possible. So that's helpful there. And then the third thing you do by doing that is really you become less of a standalone CCS business and more of a low carbon power business. And so the good news is for us, for that sort of lowest quadrant, our initial priorities is you don't necessarily preclude those third-party emissions from coming in. In fact, our view is we actually enable those a bit more. The economies of scale, the anchor tenant, if you will, of our own power plants that then on the end of those have low carbon PPAs. Now we've got injection wells, any excess capacity that we may have for injection. We actually increase the viability, lower the price for those add-on emitters that might be, in the 500,000 tons or a million ton per year kind of customer, assuming we have excess capacity. Their viability goes way up.
Yeah, I did some Googling of the latest news in carbon capture across the US before we started, and all I could find was stories about public complaining about CO2 pipelines. I thought, crikey, is this where we are? But you're obviously comfortable to be able to build these hubs, and I guess a long way from public settlements, I suppose, probably a lot of the time, isn't it? Yeah.
Well, look, it doesn't matter what, I always joke that if you put cereal milk inside a pipeline, someone would still be against it and claim
Yeah.
that it kills babies or whatever. I get it. Landowners are protective of their property rights, and I think we have to be mindful as developers to do what we say we're going to do. The best way to mitigate or accommodate landowners is to site your projects well in the first hand. Like don't do dumb things on purpose in the beginning. You can avoid a lot of problems, but not all problems. And then after that, I think you have to have a track record. You have to have a very good ground game. You have to be in these communities, engage. Tenaska has been building energy infrastructure for 40 years now. And yeah, I would say there's no project that we've ever done that's had zero opposition. But it's really a matter of how you manage those things, how you work for them. There's always going to be somebody who has a different opinion. But I think you have to get in those communities, do what you say, be forthright, don't make ridiculous claims. Scott mentioned that as well as this sort of public license that you have to get, sort of community buy-in. It's difficult, and I don't have an expectation that we have an easy road anywhere, but I do have an expectation that we will do the right thing and we'll engage in those communities and that we can find good solutions to do projects well.
Yeah, very good. And if somebody's watching this who wants to get an understanding of the US market as a whole, I guess there isn't any answer because you've just said something completely opposite to what Scott said. You said you're hardly doing any ethanol. Nothing he's doing nearly all ethanol, but I guess it's different companies, different pathways, and different things work, isn't it? I suppose that's it.
Yeah, look, the ethanol is, I mean, I'm here in Nebraska, but there's not good sequestration in Nebraska. And the unfortunate thing we referenced Tallgrass's Trailblazer project, and of course we've had several big multi-state or interstate pipeline projects over the last few years with Summit and Navigator and Wolf for that matter. The ethanol with a high concentration, high purity, generally low volumes in the, sort of low hundred thousands tons per year. Those are great sources. They just happen to not be geographically located near sequestration. So you end up with large pipelines or even folks exploring rail like Frontier Infrastructure in Southwest Wyoming. So there's lots of strategies there. I think the incentives that we use, whether it's low carbon fuel standard or 45Q or any of the other fuel-based incentives, those are great ways to get markets started. I think both of these gentlemen are in the same camp I am, and that is that this is not a zero-sum game in this kind of infrastructure development. We need everybody to be successful. We are, sort of fighting to get this first rounds of projects done, and I would just add that they get done very well. They need to be built well. That people need to own up to the commitments they've made in these communities, or it has an overhang for all of us. I do think last year was a difficult year for smaller developers, less sophisticated, more speculative projects. It's probably not a bad thing in general that we weed out some suboptimal projects. But now, this year, I think what we really need is high quality projects to get done. And we're seeing that with some of the E&P oil and gas majors are doing projects. We certainly have the Broadwing ADM Google project. That was a huge advancement there. We know the other hyperscalers, Microsoft, Meta, Amazon, are also engaged in combined cycle with capture. And I just think from a macro standpoint, from an energy policy standpoint, from a strategy standpoint, this is one of many tools in the toolbox. And I think anytime we're in an explosive period of growth on the power side, we're in a very dynamic is probably a generous way to say it, US political and policy standpoint. Being diversified is really the only way to manage through that. And so I see CCS, and then I would just argue CCUS as well, I see that as a great way to stay diversified, and certainly that's been a strength of Tenaska. We've not put all our eggs in any single basket ever, and that's proven to be a really wise strategy long term.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, we have 10 minutes left, so if I can invite Scott and Sylvain, if you want to turn your cameras on and microphones on. I mean, to me, the most interesting subject is understanding the market because it's obviously changing, and we can see questions in the box about blue ammonia and carbon dioxide removal. Maybe I'll go to Sylvain first. Is there anything you've heard from Scott and Bret you thought was particularly interesting or think might be draw people's attention to?
No, no, very, very great insights. I like Brett's point on we all have to be successful to make it work. It's also what Scott mentioned, stakeholder engagement, making sure people understand what we are doing. A lot of the questions I received were around that, what if things go wrong? And I've been in this industry for a very long time. We design systems so it doesn't go wrong and we monitor it, but we have to educate people around. And I spend a lot of my time educating, explaining, responding to questions, which are sound. They make a lot of sense. But once you understand what we're doing, the depth at which we drill, people realize, oh, actually, it works. It is effective. Okay, let's do it. And it is growing. It's also a patience game. I think we heard that from Scott and Brett and myself. We're waiting for permits to happen. We're waiting for the industry to demonstrate examples and success stories, and it's coming. I'm very hopeful.
Oh, so Scott, so there's two big factors. One is the public acceptance that could be quite obstructive, and one is different markets are emerging, but it's extremely hard, as you said in your last slide. Much harder than oil and gas production. Don't have any more thoughts you want to share?
Yeah, I think maybe a couple things. I think, Brett made a good point about, we've seen over the last year or two a number of market participants struggle and exit the market. We've seen a number of projects get whittled down. And, so I think what we're seeing is, market participants who are remaining, projects that are remaining tend to be the higher quality things. And that's going to be really important to the success of the market. I think a big thing that we need to demonstrate as an industry over the next several years here is successful projects with public buy-in. Anytime we go out and we talk to the general public about carbon capture and storage, it's generally a new thing that they're not very familiar with. If we can establish more sites and establish more familiarity, establish a track record, that sets us up for, a successful growth industry. And the other thing I'll say here is just to plug the power side of this a little bit is, Brett's not wrong that, ethanol plants tend to be smaller, right? Our typical project size is about 300,000 tons a year. The entire ethanol industry is about 45 million tons a year out of an installed base in the United States of about 2 billion tons a year. Okay. The dominant portion of that is power. And so what are we really trying to do here? We're trying to get to a lower carbon industrial base. If we never get to power, we probably shouldn't have started. And so really where we need to get to here is, with decarbonization of power through multiple mechanisms, as Brett talked about, whether that's nuclear, geothermal, or thermal with CCS. But that's ultimately the end game.
Yeah, Brett, because it's very interesting, I guess, because you're a gas power producer, so it's different dynamic to you to look at carbon capture to somebody doing it as a purely market thing, and that's a very important point, I suppose, isn't it? Like we see over in Europe, oil companies doing carbon capture just because they want to do it, not because direct financial benefit.
Yeah, I would say just a point of clarification. We trade physical gas, so we're not actually an upstream producer, but we are heavily in that industry for sure. I think the way we view, sort of piggybacking on what Scott said, the way we view CCS is it's an option for customers. So we see a market demand. We are fairly agnostic on what anyone's base motivations are, but we try to serve the market by doing things that we're good at. That's building heavy infrastructure, understanding energy markets deeply across North America. And we see this as one of those many tools to make that happen. these are one of the paradigms I always think about here is the clock speed problem. And so you've got this sort of pace of innovation that happens in AI and thinking in policy, and then you've got the pace of actual construction of infrastructure. And they're on different clock speeds. They're mistimed. So things are happening on a daily basis. We've got innovation at a scale in AI, or a pace rather, a tempo that is just really kind of unprecedented. But what's not changed is how long it takes to build things. It takes a long time to build a power plant. It takes a long time to build pipelines. It takes a long time to do it well in communities. Both these gentlemen referenced that. And so that mismatch of these clock speeds for us, what we try to do is provide some stability, some certainty, really the discipline to do these difficult things over a long time period. And then also with respect to SMRs or geothermal or even advanced nuclear, is just be mindful that incrementalism is also good here. It's always fun to do a moonshot, to talk about, big swings at the plate. But at the same time, these tiny wins stack up over time. And if you are low carbon motivated, certainly folks have thrown stones at carbon capture to say, well, it's not 100% carbon free. Well, that's true. Yeah, it's going to be 90+%. But that's incrementally better in that realm. We ought to be making these incremental steps. We ought to be decarbonizing. If that's your base motivation, then pick off the wins that we can pick off and let's build some momentum. And it's the same thing we've seen around efficiency in solar panels, efficiency in wind, same kind of progress we've seen in round tripping on batteries. So I just think as an industry, we can't lose sight of the fact that particularly on these big, very expensive, I mean, we're just super capital intensive on energy infrastructure. Takes a long time, costs a lot. I try to just bang the drum of an incrementalist approach here is also worthwhile. If you try to do those, I mean, I'm all for the big swings and the moonshots. I think there are companies that are ideally suited to take that kind of risk. For us, we're going to do the slow, unsexy version that's building hard infrastructure that will be around for decades and decades.
Yeah, it was an uplifting story, I think. Well, we've got about three minutes left. I don't know, Sylvain, you have any final words you'd like to share, or is there, I think it's personally great to hear things are moving and incremental steps from where we were a year ago, but that's probably the most we can hope for, isn't it?
Yeah, no, I mean, there are a couple of questions, in the chat if you want to address them, but no, I will leave it with, it is an industry that's adjacent to the oil and gas industry. If we take a step back, which has been working in the US for almost a century now. It's a proven technology. It's a proven system with the right workforce, the right suppliers, the right knowledge, the right geology. We talked about it, but the US are blessed with sedimentary basins that allow for underground injection. Let's use it, and that's what the industry is doing. It is slow for in terms of development, but it is happening, and we'll see much more developments in the near future.
Well, Scott, you want a last word?
Oh gosh, something creative.
No worries.
Look, I think there's probably been more negative news flow than positive in the last year, even 2 years. And I think Carl, you referenced that. You look online, and you're probably going to see more complaints about pipelines than anything else. Things are happening. I think you're hearing that from the three of us today is that folks, it's a little bit more of a head down, get stuff done, and stay out of the news approach. And there's some reasons for that. But stuff is happening, and I think as if we wake up a year from now, we're going to see more projects under construction. We're going to see more projects permitted. And so, I'd say this is a stay the course situation, but we're going to see progress.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, I think that's the end of our time. So thanks ever so much, Bret and Scott and Sylvain, for such a uplifting and educational picture. We'll be sending the video out to all the viewers in case you want to see some of this again, unless any of the speakers tell me that they don't want me to. So there's a lot of detail there, and the next webinar we'll do is 12th of February, when we'll do something similar for the UK. But thank you very much, and enjoy the rest of the evening. I hope you see you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you all.
Bye. Thank you, Carl.